Hi, my name is Val Westover, and welcome to Relationship, combining aperture and shutter speed. The combination of aperture and shutter speed is where the magic starts to happen. The ISO determines the amount of light that the image sensor needs for correct exposure. The combination of aperture and shutter speed determines how much light will reach the camera's image sensor. Aperture and shutter speed have a reciprocal relationship. When one changes in one direction, the other must change exactly the same in the opposite direction. To understand the reciprocal relationship between aperture and shutter speed, let's refer to a tap that fills containers with water. Barely open the tap, representing a small aperture, and the container will take longer to fill, representing a slow shutter speed. Open the tap wide, representing a large aperture, and the container will fill quickly, representing a fast shutter speed. Once we have determined how much light is needed, this determination is influenced by the choice of ISO. We can now adjust the aperture in one direction while adjusting the same amount from the shutter speed in the opposite direction, giving us the ability to manipulate light, depth of field, and movement while keeping the total amount of light striking the image sensor the same. Give it one more stop. We discussed that a stop of light controls the amount of light striking the camera's image sensor. Each full f-stop or full shutter speed lets in half as much light as the full setting before it and doubles the light of the full setting after it. Aperture and shutter speed have a reciprocal relationship. Up to this point, in program mode, aperture priority, and shutter priority, the camera has been in charge of helping you with your exposure. What does correct exposure mean? It means the correct amount of light is striking the image sensor. In manual mode, you are in complete control of your exposure, making sure that the correct amount of light strikes the image sensor. Different combinations for the same amount of light. Now imagine that you're going to take a picture in manual mode. You changed your settings for a correct exposure, and let's say that your aperture was f8 and your shutter speed was 1/125th of a second. With this combination, you will now be bringing in the correct amount of light to strike the camera's image sensor. You can't change this fact. If you bring in more light, you will overexpose the image. If you bring in less light, you will underexpose the image. But let's say you did not want an aperture of f8. What if you want a larger aperture of f4 because you might want to create shallow depth of field? Well, that's okay, because if you move your aperture in one direction by 2 stops, then move your shutter speed in the opposite direction by 2 stops, and you will maintain the exact same amount of light striking the camera's image sensor as f8 at 1/125th of a second. Because aperture and shutter speed have a reciprocal relationship, just remember, if you change your shutter speed by 4 stops, then you must change your aperture by 4 stops in the opposite direction. So to recap, if an exposure of f8 at 1/125th of a second was determined to be the correct amount of light that the camera's image sensor needed for a correct exposure, you can change your settings to achieve the results that you want while still maintaining the same amount of light striking the camera's image sensor. For example, if you needed a smaller aperture of f22 For a landscape shot with a long depth of field, then put your camera on a tripod. And remember, to maintain the same amount of light, all you have to remember is if you move a setting in one direction, you must move the other in the opposite direction by the exact same amount. Understanding the relationship between aperture and shutter speed is vital to achieving correct exposures. Aperture and shutter speed have a reciprocal relationship. When one changes in one direction, the other must change exactly the same in the opposite direction. When you say give it one more stop, you're referring to changing either the aperture or shutter speed by one full stop. Each full f-stop or full shutter speed setting lets in half as much light as the full setting before it and doubles the light of the full setting after it. Once you've determined how much light is needed for a correct exposure, you can change your settings all you want to accomplish many different visual effects. Just remember not to change the amount of light that strikes the camera's image sensor. Combining aperture and shutter speed tips. Number 1. Keep it simple. Keep your f-stop on one setting and change your shutter speed as your lighting condition changes. Number 2. When changing one setting in one direction, you must change the other setting by the same amount in the opposite direction when the lighting condition is static. Number 3. Use a large aperture and a slow shutter speed in low light situations. Number 4. Use a small aperture and a fast shutter speed to freeze motion with long depth of field. Number 5. A small aperture with a slow shutter speed is equivalent to a large aperture with a fast shutter speed. Relationship practice. We are now going to do a review. However, we are not done discussing the relationship between aperture and shutter speed. Relationship practice material number 1. Shutter speed controls light and movement. Number 2. True or false? You can achieve the same amount of light striking the camera's image sensor using different settings. True. Number 3. If you change your shutter speed setting by 2 stops, how many stops in the opposite direction must you change your f-stop? 2. Number 4. List 4 different settings that you could use with an exposure setting of f8 at 1/125th of a second, f11 at 1/60th of a second, f5.6 at 1/250th of a second, f4 at 1/500th of a second, and f2.8 at 1/1000th of a second. Number 5. To create shallow depth of field and to freeze motion, you would need a large aperture and a fast shutter speed. Number 6. Find willing subjects and practice photographing them using different combinations of shutter speeds and f-stops, and compare each image to see your results. To keep your photography very easy while having more control of your exposure, here are 3 things to keep in mind about the relationship between aperture and shutter speed. Number 1. Aperture and shutter speed have a reciprocal relationship. When one changes in one direction, the other must change exactly the same in the opposite direction. Number 2, the term stop refers to doubling or halving light. When you say give it one more stop, you're referring to changing either the aperture or shutter speed by one full stop. Number 3, ISO determines the sensitivity of the image sensor. The combination of aperture and shutter speed determines how much light will reach the camera's image sensor. How to practice in manual mode? Well, you're not ready to practice in manual mode until you first go to the next step, metering, measuring light for the correct exposure. If you love photography now, just wait till you learn how to meter and measure light. This is where you will not only learn how to shoot in manual mode, you will learn how to meter and measure light so that you'll be able to shoot in any lighting situation and accomplish mind-blowing images. Understanding the relationship between aperture and shutter speed is vital to achieving correct exposures. Now go and spend as much time as you need absorbing the information that you just learned until you feel that you have a strong understanding of the reciprocal relationship between aperture and shutter speed. Relationship bonus. Wouldn't it be nice to know exactly how much to adjust your ISO if your shutter speed is too slow? If you look closely, you will notice that almost every time that the shutter speed changes from one full stop of light to another, the shutter speed doubles in number. For example, if you change your shutter speed from 1/15th of a second to 1/30th of a second, you have just changed your shutter speed one full stop of light faster. Now let's take a look at ISO. If you look closely, you will notice that every time that the ISO changes from one full stop of light of sensitivity to another, the ISO doubles in number. So now, if your shutter speed is too slow, just count how many full stops of light that you need the shutter speed to be adjusted. And then adjust your ISO by the same number. By adjusting your ISO by the same amount of full stops that your shutter speed needs to be adjusted, you will now be able to adjust your shutter speed to the desired setting without affecting your correct exposure. By becoming familiar with your full ISOs, shutter speeds, and apertures, you will get faster at achieving the settings that you want so that you don't miss that important shot. Congratulations! You have just completed relationship, combining aperture and shutter speed. You are now ready to move on to the next step, metering, measuring light for the correct exposure.